That's it, ag ambassadors. So thank you for being here. And normally, this is not a well-oiled machine, so you're learning that state government at its worst. So no, not really. But we thank you for being here. I think if you have time to listen, I think you're going to find today's program very interesting. But first, let's do bill introductions. We'll first call on Kelsey Olson from the Department of Agriculture.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I would request the introduction of RS 0379. This is related to the Weights and Measures Act and updates that we would like to request and the fees associated with our voluntary service that we provide.
Any questions? Any objections? Seeing none, the bill is introduced. Thank you. Leo Henning, KDHE.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and committee members. My name is Leo Henning, and I am the Deputy Secretary and Director of Environment at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And I do have a bill I'd like to bring in. The bill introduces a revocation of statutes on some statutes that are no longer needed for land spreading of oil and gas drilling waste. The RS number is 25R0514.
All right, pretty good. Any questions? Any objections? Seeing none, the bill is introduced. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there the bill introductions today? Seeing none, before we get to our presentation, we do have, sorry, if we were like, Jonah and the, not Jonah. That's terrible. Help me. The fishes and the loaves and the fishes? Jonah? Yeah, Jonah, okay. Oh, Jonah the whale.
Jesus.
What Jesus? Yeah, that one guy. Yeah. Anyway. So please don't hold it against us, but Representative Rozier so graciously observed that she made sourdough bread, so I demanded basically she make a loaf, not knowing it would be so quickly. But I don't know if there are. And then we have, for those of you that missed the lunch today, we have cookies. I don't know. Anyway, take them this way, take them that way. Oh, here's the napkins. Better, here. Take a napkin. Sorry, doctor. We'll try not to be too much. We asked the dairy folks to bring milk, but, well, kind of. No, we really didn't, so thank you. So I apologize, but got to keep the committee members happy.
Seriously? You brought sourdough? Really?
All right. And we thank the Ag Alliance for the lunch today. And I believe there's a breakfast next week. What's that?
Let us break bread together.
I just need a little bit. That's fine. Okay. Sometime today.
Before I came in here, actually.
That's all right. That's fine for me. Thank you. All right, very good. We have a long way to go. Oh, there's some over there, so we do have enough.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I panicked.
Good.
Very good. Okay. Well, one of the things we want to do, we started off this year, we've talked about kind of the ag economy and the general overall. Another issue that is of importance to all of us, it's more than maybe what we're used to, but, we've been dealing with HPAI for quite a while, and it continues to be in the news. And so we wanted to bring in Dr. Justin Smith, who is the Kansas Animal Health Commissioner, on kind of an update of what's going on, not only with poultry, but maybe multi-species. And so, the presentation should be on your file within our committee notes, and then ask your questions when we have the appropriate time. And so I think there's probably a lot to go over, a lot to learn, and maybe do some myth busting. So, but Dr. Smith, thanks for coming to committee today.
members of the committee. So, yeah, as you reiterated, this is something that HPAI, or highly pathogenic avian influenza, is something that the nation frankly has been dealing with for the last 3 years, and Kansas has been as well. So I'm going to take a little bit of time and kind of talk a little bit, some updates of where we're at today, and then talk a little bit about what Kansas is doing specifically in an effort to try to help our producers and keep us as safe as possible. With that said, there's a lot of dynamics to this virus that we're going to talk a little bit about that hopefully maybe will provide a little clarity with that. So with that, again, and I apologize for the display, some of the small type. I hope that you've got it in your file and you can refer back to that. But this is just a representation of our licensees, the poultry licensees, associated licensees we have here in the state of Kansas. As well as you'll see on there, there's some backyard flocks that are not really required to be licensed with us, but we know that they're there based off of disease investigations or testing we may have done, or state fair, county fair testing that may have occurred. So this is kind of a mix of those licenses that we have, as well as what few backyard flocks we may have. Efforts is to give you just an idea of how diverse we are. We're not a heavily poultry populated state, obviously, compared to some other states, but we've got a really diverse industry. Probably one of the ones that we're largest in far as in the nation, is the number of our game bird facilities and the size that they have out there. So again, the color depictions is the deal. We do have a small cadre of turkey flocks down in the southeast corner, but not, obviously they're not across the state. So again, just a representation of where we may be across the state in our bird pavilion. So highly pathogenic avian influenza, you'll see that there's many terms. You'll hear a lot of terms that basically mean the same thing. It's the same virus that's out there. So you're going to hear HPAI, and I'll probably refer to that from this point on. Also, you'll hear about H5N1, which is frankly the same virus. We just coined it different when it got into some of our different species, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. Avian influenza, bird flu, all, again, are all the same virus that we're dealing with at this point in time. So it is a contagious viral disease. It is impacting a lot of our poultry industry across the board, from broilers to layers to turkeys to game birds. None of the poultry world out there is immune to this. With that said, it's caused a tremendous amount of cost as far as response, as cost to the industry, really decimated some of these industries based on the number of positives they have in that region. You also see some of the clinical signs, and I won't go over all those. You can see those, but anything that you would relate to flu is kind of what we're seeing in these poultry world with that. With that said, we did see a significant impact in our dairy world this last summer, and I list some of the signs that are in that dairy thing. I want to point out the differences in this disease between these two species. Is that again, in the poultry world, it's highly pathogenic. It kills them. It will cause enough sickness that these birds eventually they suffer and they die. Not necessarily the case in the dairy industry. We've seen them be adversely affected. Their milk production tanks. It goes way down. These cows they go off feed. It takes a tremendous amount of supportive care, but they recover and they get over it and they come back into production. And so we see that. So the response and the way that we respond to them is differently within that different species. And it's been confusing to the individuals and out there, because why are we killing birds in a response for the disease and we're not in the dairy world? And so I just wanted to point out that there is some definitive differences between them and the way they affect these cows. Milk production has been the key thing in the dairy world. It's in the udder. And that's been the key component as far as how these dairies really start seeing these positives pop up in a short time. This slide's pretty convoluted and really kind of busy, but it's an effort to try to show you how the dynamics of this virus is working within our industries, but also to show you some directionality in that. So obviously we've seen it in our poultry world because of the exposure to our wild bird population. So our wild bird populations, the migratory birds, are the ones that are positive, and they're the ones that's carrying this across the nations and across our country and across our state, frankly. That over history has been the fact that that's how our poultry operations have gotten infected. Back in 2014, 2015, we seen actually farms passing it to farms because we didn't know as much about it. That's not been the case in this outbreak, that our biosecurity mechanisms that our industry's put in place, that most of our wild or our bird incursions have been what we call wild bird incursions, or a point source infection, meaning that we can prove that they got it from the wild birds, they didn't pass it from barn to barn. With that being said, we also know that the wild bird population is continuing out there, and as this changes, somewhere down in March, somewhere in the panhandle of Texas or Kansas, we've seen a 1-point incursion into a dairy operation. And then from there, that dairy operation, we've seen that virus propagate, reassorted, changed, adapted to the dairy world, and we've seen it pass through the dairy world up through Texas, Kansas, and now we've got, I think there's 17 states that are confirmed positive with the dairy component of it. Right now, California is the only state that's really being impacted, and they're being heavily impacted with it in the dairy world at this point in time, but something we're keeping our eyes on. The other thing I wanted to try to show is that we are seeing some incursions in cats, namely domestic cats as well as wild cats. And we've seen it in some humans. There's been some impact in some human cases out there. I won't say that that's not a big deal, but it's been relatively minor in numbers. And most of those humans, it's been associated with them being workers in a dairy or a positive poultry facility. So there's been some outliers out there, and we can talk more about them as we go on. But most of them have been had direct contact with with the positives in our dairy or our poultry world. The other thing we did see is that our dairies were able to transfer it back to birds. And so we did see that strain going back into some birds on some isolated cases. We did have that occur in the state of Kansas as well. We not necessarily have seen the birds spread it back to the dairy. Again, it was a one-time event that happened in March of this last year. We haven't seen that occur anymore. So the birds aren't giving it to dairies further. It's the dairies passing it to dairies. Again, I know this is very convoluted and complex, and I don't mean to belabor it. I just want to give you some essence of the dynamics and how we're having to chase this down and look at this. We're doing this all through genetic sequencing, meaning that they're sequencing that virus and seeing what that looks like, and they can actually review and look at the history and the ancestry of that virus and look at the directionality of the way it's moving based on the genetic sequencing that they're doing. So at this point, I've got a few slides just to talk about the poultry world, and then we'll talk a little bit about the dairy world. Whoops. So this is just a map of overview of the national situation. Every state in the nation is positive or has had a positive in the last 3 years. Hawaii being the last one that just came up positive, and Puerto Rico as well. So again, a state that's been fairly isolated. We've been trying to keep it out of there, but Hawaii did have a backyard flock that popped positive, and they've actually got wild bird surveillance there now that's showing positives. So every state in the nation has got it. This map is of January 10th, I think is what that date is up there. But I will say we've had more positive, and I was just telling a few of you earlier, this weekend the nation got hit pretty hard. There's Missouri, there's Ohio, Indiana, Georgia, Florida, all had major positives again this last weekend. Missouri, for impact, just had a 1.6 million layer facility go positive, and then they've got another one that's positive, and I don't know how big that one is. So it's still out there. Fortunately, Kansas, we're in pretty good shape right at this point in time, but we know that we're always we're susceptible to it by all means as these wild birds continue to move and migrate across our states. Yeah, just some of the numbers there. I'm not going to go over all of them, but we've got a multitude of sites out there, and unfortunately, some of these commercial operations have been hit multiple times, 3 and 4 times over the years as they continue to clean up, repopulate. Then they get a new incursion of it. Again, this is just a bar graph to try to show you some of the ideas of how it's moved over the years. Again, the small print, I apologize, but the blue line, the one with the big spike in it, was 2022. So we did see a big spike in the spring of the year 2022 when we first started this process out. And then we've been able to kind of somewhat level it off a little bit based off of biosecurity and that. The other thing I'd point out is if you look at the 23, which is the brown, and 24, which is the gray, they're about mirroring each other over the last 3 or 4 months in the fall of the year, other than we're a month off, and that's strictly due to the migration. We had the warmer year this year, so the migration didn't start early enough, and so we're about a month back. You're going to see 2025 probably look about what 24 started out with, but I do think we're going to see a spike here in the next month as some of these continued positives that are out there. So 25 we'll probably see a little spike in the January, February timeframe. So this is Kansas. We've had 41 total affected premises over the last 2 or 3 years now, 3 years in February. The first incursion of this strain was in February of 2022. So we've had 41 affected premises, 23 total counties that's been involved in there. Like I said, 23 of those have been backyard flocks, 7 egg layers, and the rest of them have been game birds out there. Fortunately, right now, we don't have any control zones out there. They've all been released, meaning that we don't have a positive that's out in our commercial world out there. We do have some quarantines on facilities still in place. Frankly, if they're raised on dirt, they got to be under quarantine for 120 days after we dispose of the birds. So there is some quarantine still established on those facilities, but there's no control areas out there for any of those neighboring facilities. Kansas is we're in a good spot in the fact that when I showed you those licensees, we don't have a commercial operation. If we put a control zone around that, we don't have a commercial operation that's going to incur on another commercial operation. So we're spread out enough that's good for us. Not necessarily so good for some other states that are really densely populated and have concentrations of poultry operations out there. So some of the things we do when we do have a positive response, and I will not go through this entire list, but just some of the things that we try to do. So the first thing we're going to do when we get that positive lab confirmation that it is positive, we're going to go with that. We're going to go out to that producer. We're going to do an inventory of how many birds he's got there. That's important. We get out there as soon as we possibly can once we get that positive, because that's what the indemnity is paid on, is the number of birds that they have alive at that point in time. And so that's when we're going to try to get out there and confirm that inventory. We're going to look at the food, the bedding, and everything else out there, because that's all involved in that indemnity process when we go in there and depopulate that facility. Likewise, we're going to issue a quarantine on those facilities, and then we develop that response plan. And out of those 41 positives we had out there, I don't think there's probably 2 of them that we responded in the same way, meaning that all of the facilities are a little bit different. The tools that we have that are accessibility to go out and depopulate these birds is all different. How many people we take, what kind of equipment we take, and all of that. Most of them we've accomplished through CO2 gas, but there have been a few that we've done with foam as well. So again, the timing of the response, the method, the disposal method, trying to figure out how to dispose of some of these operations, particularly if they happen to be in a suburban area. How do we get rid of these dead birds? Burials are our method of choice, but sometimes burial's not available for us. And so what do we look like? I will tell you right here, that's getting to be one of our biggest hurdles, is trying to figure out a proper way to dispose of these carcasses when we respond to a disease event. Then we notify the county authorities. So our first calls is to the county's emergency manager, as well as the public health official and the extension office in that county. Our goal is once we have them depopulated, then they can start pushing that information out to their constituents to make people aware and to try to increase that biosecurity and for people to ramp up their due diligence within their own flocks out there. We do notify KDHE of all of our responders, names and addresses, as well as who the people were that we responded to. And then they do their follow-up from a public health component with the local public health and what that looks like as far as reaching out to them. I will tell you from our perspective, what happens is they call us the day of, said, how do you feel? And then they respond back in 10 days and say, did you have any adverse effects? And fortunately, we haven't had that. We haven't had any adverse effects from our responders based on these positives that we respond to. And then we develop that control zone if it's required. And I say that if it's required. If it's a backyard flock, USDA policy is we do not require a control zone around them. If it's a commercial facility, meaning that they sell product off their site, then they are required to have a control zone. And then we develop that surveillance plan, what that looks like in that control zone to go out and try to see if we have it in more regions. So we're going to swap over to dairy cattle, and this one won't be quite as long. There again, this is the overview of the national situation. As we talked about, it got into the dairy world. It's gotten a little more convoluted in the fact of milk is the product that tends to be positive in this deal. So it gets in the udder of these cows, we end up with positive milk. The fortunate thing is early on, FSIS and FDA was able to confirm that our pasteurization process does work in this virus. So it decapacitates this virus, and so it's not a food safety issue in pasteurized milk out there. So Kansas was one of the first 2 states that was considered affected because of the fact that back in March, like I said, Texas or Kansas, we're not sure where it happened at, probably Texas the way it looks, was the first 2 positives out there. Kansas had 4 confirmed positive dairy herds at that time, and knock on wood, we haven't had any more that we know of. There's no indication that any of our dairies are being adversely affected with this virus today. We're continuing to do some testing. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we're in a good spot right now. Again, California is the one, and they're just giving it back and forth to each other, and they're really in a mess out there right now. I don't know if you can see that. 727 of the 906 or 926 premises are in California right now, and that's just because of the density that they're packed into that Central Valley. So some of the things we did from a regulatory response is back in April, we issued, the commissioner, myself issued an order, a commissioner's order that required certificates of veterinary inspection or veterinary oversight on all lactating cattle that were moving into the state or within the state. The idea was for that veterinarian to affirm that there was no clinical signs associated with that dairy where those cattle were moving at. So we did that. Fortunately, throughout the summer, that worked, and then we were able to, because of the fact that it's not in Kansas right now, we rescinded that order in October with the reservation that we may have to put it back on. We reserve the right to do that, but at the same time, we rescinded it in October. Federal order came out about the same time that required testing components for any of those lactating cows that are moving across state lines. So today, there still is. If you move a lactating cow across state lines, you have to have a negative test within 7 days of that movement. So that's still going on at this point in time. They just implemented the National Milk Testing Strategy, and that's in an effort, a nationwide surveillance program to try to see where it's at. Kansas is participating in that, in the fact that what we're doing is we're testing milk at the processor silo level in an effort to try to see if they're picking up positives. And then we go back and start looking who contributed to that silo and start looking at individual dairy testing at that point in time. But right now, it's just at the silo level at that processor. So we started it first of this month. We don't have all of our silos tested yet, but we will continue to do that on a rotational method. Through the normal processes that we test milk, through our KDA dairy inspectors collect samples there, we're just asking them to collect 1 additional sample for us. So as we wrap up, this is some of the slide, and again, this is kind of a busy slide, but this was an effort to try to give you an idea of some of the things that we do on a daily basis in an effort to try to keep our state safe from any disease, but particularly this avian influenza we've done. So you're going to see a lot of words up there. Probably the biggest one is that one right there in the center is the biosecurity planning. We work with our producers. We have somebody on staff on a daily basis that is working with these producers to build what we call an enhanced biosecurity plan. It's an operational specific plan that goes out and looks at their operation to say, here's steps you can take to put in place to increase your biosecurity and increase your safety. Again, the goal is to not get it on their place. If we can keep it off, we're far hit. A little more problematic in the HPAI world because of the fact that it's in the wild birds and we can't control those very well, but there is some of the things out there. But we do navigate. We are the official state agency for the National Poultry Improvement Plan program. Again, that's a disease program that we administer out there. It is in Kansas. Many of those facilities you've seen on that first slide were National Poultry Improvement Plan participants. It's a voluntary program, but we try to encourage these operations to get involved with us and become part of that plan. But just avian influenza surveillance, We haven't met for about a couple months now, but we pulled together a dairy stakeholder group right when this place started in the dairy world, had weekly conversations with them about what this looks like, what does our response need to look like in Kansas, what do they look for. Likewise, we have a poultry advisory group that we meet with regularly to talk about how does this look from a poultry industry standard and what needs to be placed. So again, I won't go over all these. Premises registration, we're doing that each and every day so that if we get that disease, we can respond to that. It's all based off that premise registration. That's how the indemnity process works. That's how all of the payments processes work. All the USDA support programs work through that premise ID registration component of it. So again, a lot of different things out there. But yeah, these are just a few of the highlights that we talk about from our world of how we do things on a daily basis to help the industry and try to get to that point. With that, that's kind of a fast and rapid approach to it, but happy to stand for questions as appropriate.
All right, Dr. Smith, that was a lot. So we'll hopefully, okay, we'll put you in the list. Up first, the Representative Schlingensieben.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, thank you for your presentation. I've kind of two questions. So you talked about burial as the best form of disposal for poultry, but that there was a problem with that in terms of where you bury them or
Yeah, so one of the things we work with is our KDHE environmental folks, and so the first thing we're going to do is call and say, hey, here's some possible sites. We work with the producer saying, where would you like to bury? And we look at possible sites, and they do their due diligence and full review. Is that an appropriate spot based on, saturations and water tables and rock and that type of thing. And so it's a back and forth to try to figure out where is an appropriate site to go dig that hole.
And if I may, just with regard to cattle, so does the disease just run its course in a herd, and then generally they're fine, and then they start producing again and all is well, or is there some kind of intervention that takes place there?
So
other than containment?
Yeah, containment, they treat them symptomatically, so they support those cattle. I've talked to the producers, they talk about the gallons of fluids that they pump in these cows in an effort to try to get them back started again. But it is a sustainment process till they get over it. And yes, historically, it looks like that these cows will recover. They'll come back into milk production within 7 to 10 days. They'll start ramping back up and come back. We're new enough into it yet. We're not sure what the long-term effects of those cows are from a herd standpoint of whether, they're going to come back at the level they ever started with. But most of these dairies are treating it and getting these cows back in shape and going on.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we go on, so who's the lead agency, though, with disposal? Is it KDHE or is it KDA?
Probably KDHE is going to have, we won't defy what KDHE comes back to us and says that they can't, if that's not a good spot, we're going to go out and look for another one. It's our responsibility to take care of it. If we can't find a suitable disposal site, we'll start looking at other methods, whether it's composting, whether it's, taken to an landfill component, or whether we look at, even through our university, the digester. But yeah, we'll look at other alternatives if the burial component doesn't fit.
But really, that needs to be done, though, ahead of time. Once that call is made, they need to find a place before you start euthanasia or whatever, correct?
That's exactly right, yeah. Our policy is we're not going to utilize a whole lot until we have a place to do with those birds. With that said, there's a significant death loss that's already occurring because of that virus that's impact on that flock.
Okay. Representative Roth?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious, we've had the waterfowl migrating year after year after year for years. So this is a new type of flu that's been discovered, this bird flu, or has it been around forever, or is it just now starting to?
So it's been around so avian influenza has been around forever. There's certain influenza, just like it is in humans, that are more impactful to us and more impactful to those birds than that. This strain started in Europe back in the 2020, 2021. Historically, we see it, and we see it on a yearly basis. They keep track of these strains, and as they move up through the Bering Strait and then into Canada and then migrate south, they carry it. This H5N1, which is this strain of influenza, We recognized in Europe in 2021, and then it came down through the United States in 2022 was the first year we've done it. We've seen it, what we call reassort or adapt over the years. We see different strains. The strain, and I don't want to get too in-depth, but the strain we're dealing with today is not the strain we dealt with in 2022. It's a different strain, but it's the same virus.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
one more question. Also, you mentioned that the migration was a month off or something like that, and I noticed that driving back from Missouri this weekend, huge flocks of blackbirds, and which in my mind I've always seen in September. But do those blackbirds, they migrate, you know, in huge numbers. Do they carry the flu with them as well?
The blackbirds have not been incriminated. We've looked. Now, there's been a few isolated cases of it in that have been directly associated with a facility that was positive. But in general, the Wildlife Services, USDA, is doing wild bird and wild animal surveillance all the time. They haven't been incriminated in it. It's the wild migratory birds, or the waterfowl birds, the ducks and the geese.
Thank you so much for the answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, report. I assume this is different from the avian cholera, which is a bacterium, correct?
Correct.
Because I can remember, and kind of what puzzles me, in the middle 70s, we picked up, I worked for Nebraska Game and Parks, and we picked up thousands and thousands of dead ducks and geese with avian cholera on the Nebraska rainwater basins out around Grand Island. But with this, they precipitate in carrying it, but we're not getting any reports of large-scale die-offs of wild birds like we did, like I seen in the avian cholera, which is just huge. Why not? I mean, these birds are obviously surviving, and just it must not be very lethal to that wild population in huge numbers.
Sure. So two things with that is that, yes, historically, we haven't seen the wild bird death loss like we would associate it, and, you know, frankly, they were carriers of it. I will tell you the last 2 years, we have been seeing a significant, and I can't quote you the numbers, Wildlife and Parks keeps track of that, but we've had thousands of birds die on our reservoirs across the state of Kansas, and they continually to die off. So this strain that we're dealing with now since 2022 has been impacting particularly the geese. The snow geese and the Ross geese, for some reason, seem to be very susceptible to this, and it's really decimating some of those flocks.
Thank you for that.
Representative Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Question, say you have a large situation. How many staff do you send out, and, you know, what do they do when they go out there? And just go through that process
Sure.
with us, please. Thank you.
So again, it's kind of dependent on that operation. I will tell you, we had a large operation in December of '23, and it was a large layer operation, 1 million plus birds. You know, frankly, that company took on that challenge of creating the personnel. So we had people there, and they were minimal as far as overseeing the process and making sure that process has it. But we've also responded to some game bird facilities that had 25, 30,000 birds, and it's took 20 to 30 of us to try to get that accomplished just because of the labor that's involved in there. So I will say 30's probably been the most that we've sent out on any operation. We try to send 4 to 5, depending on the backyard flock situation and what that looks like. But all of it depends on what tools we have available to us and what we can utilize. You know, I talked about CO2. We got a couple different methods. We got a large vaporizer that we can utilize, but it takes a pretty good footprint, and it takes a lot of support, namely generators and supply tanks. If we can't get those gathered in enough time, then we go out with small bottles and lots of people and start gathering birds and putting them in a chamber. So I'm not giving you a good answer, but it kind of depends. But, you know, our goal is to try to get industry to take on this plan and develop their own plan as much as they possibly can, with us supporting what we can with that process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Seibert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. You know, we was talking about price of eggs going up to $5, $6, $7 in grocery stores, and they're blaming it on a bunch of the, or what do they call them, chicken farms in Kansas having this bird flu. Is this true, or is that just a rumor? Or Someone said they lost 40,000 chickens already.
So we've had some Kansas facilities have been impacted, anywhere from 20,000 to, like I said, over 1 million birds in some of these hatcheries, or not hatcheries, but these egg layers. Across the nation it has been. I'm going to have to defer your question probably to industry to see how much impact that's truly had on the egg industry. But yes, I think in a small point in time, we're seeing some impact because it takes a lot for these guys to get back up to production. When you take Iowa, for instance, lost a 4 million head bird layer. And so when you take that out in one day or 1 week, it takes time to get back in, and these companies then have to find that surge capacity to repopulate that facility.
So what happens to those million birds? Do they go into dog food or anything, or are they just burned and destroyed?
We buried them.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Weichel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Smith, for being here today and for all the work that you're doing on this issue. Representative Seward asked the first half of my question kind of about the economic impact to the state, but I'm also curious to the individual farmers or landowners or however you want to categorize them. Like, do people have insurance to cover this? Is there, like, what happens when dairy cattle are out of production for 7 to 10 days or a flock is euthanized?
So to answer the insurance question, I don't know specifically. I'd venture to say not everybody has insurance. They've not taken that out for death loss because, frankly, the premiums, I can imagine, are horrendous in that respect. But I do know that there is some operations out there that do have some sort of disaster response to that. With that said, and I was remiss in not saying it is a lot of this work we're doing in cooperation with our USDA partners and our and state as well as nationally. So there is an indemnity program for the bird component of it. There's an indemnity program, so they'll pay for the loss of those birds, the value of those birds, the feed and any bedding that may take place, any cleaning and disinfection that may take place. What they don't pay for is the loss of production. So what it takes to get back into production, they don't have a mechanism for paying that. A little different model started with the dairy world this year and the fact that they leveraged some ELAP funding in an effort to try to help support these dairies for loss of production. So some of these dairies, if they were confirmed positive, they were able to apply for additional funds to help support their milk loss, as well as they were able to there's some funding available for biosecurity planning and some funding available for pasteurizers on site, that type of thing. So there is some government USDA programs to help support that. But in the dairy world, they had to be confirmed positive to be eligible to do that. And like I said, a lot of our Kansas dairy, we only had 4 that were confirmed positive in Kansas.
Representative Mosley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's a lot of misinformation coming out with the avian flu. What are some resources that we can point the general public to dispel some of the misinformation that's going on about the risk, at least in Kansas?
Sure. So I would direct you to our website at KDA, the agriculture. We try to keep that up to speed, but also tell you to go to USDA. USDA has a phenomenal amount of resources on there. Unfortunately, there's a lot there, and so you got to kind of weed through it. But they have a web page for poultry, and they have a web page for livestock, and then they actually have a web page for wildlife on there as well. So there's a lot of information there. But with that being said, if there's something specific out there, please reach out to any of us, and we'd be happy to direct you in that component.
Thank you. I have one more question. Sure. So right now, Kansas is considered low risk. What are some of the indicators that will move us into a moderate risk assessment? From a
Dairy perspective or poultry perspective?
It can be an and/or situation. Okay. Is your question.
Yeah. So from a poultry world, we know that we're vulnerable. I mean, meaning that we have wild birds here and that we have a lot out from there. Kansas has moved to kind of a low risk because we have seen the cold snap move those migratory birds on south, so we haven't seen that. We're going to see that reincursion come back in the spring. With that said, we don't have active infections now, and so we don't have control zones, and so our risk is a little bit lower. So from a poultry perspective, I think if we get a positive and we have to develop a control zone, we'll see that concern ramp up. With that said, our poultry folks can't let their guard down because it's still out there. There's a lot of virus in the environment out there right now. From a dairy perspective is we're considered provisionally unaffected, meaning that we don't have anything that indicates that we have through our surveillance and what milk testing we're doing. We're continuing to do that. What would ramp that up is if we find a positive and have to go out and start investigating some herds to see if we have cows actively have an infection.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Rozier?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Smith. Kind of going back to the economic, but also containment, where are we sending these labs to? Are they staying in state? Are we having them done at K-State?
Yes, so
Okay.
we have a NALM lab, and a National Animal Health Laboratory Network. It's a USDA component that's at Kansas State, the Kansas State Veterinary Diagnostic Lab.
Yep.
So all of our samples that we test from a disease investigation, as well as surveillance, as well as environmental sampling, and plus the milk sampling are all going to the NALM lab. They're getting sent on to NVSL for confirmation if there is a positive there, but they're all going to the K-State NALM lab.
Can I ask a follow-up? My follow-up is how much do we have out-of-state incoming to that diagnostic lab here in Kansas?
So at this point in time, I know there's some. I know we help support Iowa because of the surge capacity there that they have out there. That's what the NALM lab process is the fact that, you know, if there's a network. So if that lab is overwhelmed, then we'll get some of that sampling in. I'm not totally privy to all the sampling they're doing and all the testing they're doing at the diagnostic lab. I know like California is overwhelmed. They're sending samples into South Dakota and Iowa. I don't know that we've gotten any of those, but there's an opportunity to.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Smith. And sorry, I should have said Angel Roser. I'm from Manhattan, so.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Droege? Representative Droege, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine's more of a, I guess, a statement. You know, we talk about replacement of these birds after the virus has been found and they've been eliminated. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to have people in the industry that produce the eggs to make more birds, and you've got an industry set up to supply a certain number of eggs, and a routine rebuilding of flocks as flocks age. So when you eliminate 1 million birds, you create a real problem in the supply chain because you don't have enough eggs to go back and build back your flocks, and it creates a bottleneck. I think that's right. And
Nope, that's exactly on tune. I mean, these operations are fine-tuned in the fact that they don't have a lot of surge capacity, so they're not generating a lot of extra eggs out there, to your point. Their incubators don't have a lot of extra capacity to run these eggs through. So I've talked to some companies, you know, they've done some practices where they've molted these hens and kept them over for another set in an effort to try to increase and spread their capacity needs. But yeah, some of these operations and some of these companies, it's been a huge logistical nightmare for them trying in an effort to keep these farms out there. And then when you got your contract growers, you know, when they lose their birds, they gotta get back in line to get birds back in an effort to, because that barn's only making them money when they got birds in them.
Good, all right. So it's kind of a chicken or egg situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Thanks, Josh. Josh figured that one, so, all right. I'll give credit where credit's due. Representative Mosier, then Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you speak to this virus jumping to the human person? Thank you.
So again, we've seen that happen. I think the other day, there's been 67, maybe 69 confirmed cases of a human having this virus. Historically, it's been very minor, and meaning that it's more of a pink eye or conjunctivitis. The symptoms have been very, but there have been some occasions where there's been a couple of them, and you may have seen in the press where there was a gentleman in Louisiana that passed away because of H5N1 virus. My understanding, that person had some underlying medical conditions, but it's still, and he lived with these chickens, and so it didn't minimize it, but there was some explanation for it. So it has happened, and that is one of our concerns. It doesn't look like it has a tremendous predilection to get into humans. CDC still classifies it as a low risk. Where our exposure's been is for those workers or those folks that have had high contact to that milk or had high contact to those poultry worlds. But there is always a concern that when we get it into our mammalian species, that it does have the ability to influenza is what we call reassort. They're changing all the time, and that's why we have to get a new flu shot every year, is because it's changed. And so we know there's that opportunity to get into our humans, and that's something we're keeping an eye on.
Thank you again for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Minix?
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Is anybody working on a immunization shot for humans that work in this environment, or actually for the chicken flocks, so that they don't come down with this?
So from a human component, I'm only going to tell you what I've heard, and that is that yes, there is. I mean, they've encouraged, in fact, there's a program through CDC that has made normal influenza vaccine more available to our farm workers, and they're encouraging them. In fact, there's programs to go out and on site and give them if that's a desire to have them out there. With that said, I've also understood that there is some H5N1 vaccines in the tank ready to go if they decide to pull the trigger and start immunizing people or workers with the H5N1 variety. From a poultry world, yes, they're working on vaccines, and there's been RPOs pushed out there for vaccine development. That gets into a much bigger conversation, and it all has to do with trade. So right now, United States has the ability to trade poultry products nationwide because we're a vaccination-free status. If we implement vaccine, there's a good chance that countries are going to utilize that against us. And so, in fact, I just listened to a call down here. They're really close. They feel like they have a vaccine that is probably efficacious. It's just got to get through the trade component of the politics, if I don't mind the politics of trying to get it to utilize. But the conversations are getting deeper, and they're getting more serious about we're going to have to vaccinate ourselves out of this, because we were hoping the virus is going to change, and it hasn't reverted back to a non-virulent variety yet.
Just a slight follow-up, but as you've noted, this virus mutates similar to a basic flu virus. Every year we have different strains of the human flu. This chicken flu is kind of doing the same thing.
Yep.
But there are companies out there working on something if we were to have a major infection within the human species that maybe something will be available.
Right. No, like I said, I can tell you they have one in the toolbox back there ready to go if we need it. So, but they're always assessing the new one. And to your point, I mean, again, don't want to belabor it, but when we started this, it was an A1 strain. It went to the 2344. In the dairy world, it's the B313 strain, and what we're dealing with now is the D11 strain. So it's all the same virus, it's strained out a little differently.
Thank you very much.
Other questions? Dr. Smith, as a committee here, we come from a variety of backgrounds, but we have, 100 and some other colleagues that aren't in this committee. I'm sure at night they're watching a replay of this to gain great knowledge, but no. What kind of a message can you give us as we talk with our colleagues? Because, we hear something in the news and we get all overly excited about, oh, we can't drink milk, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. But is there a layman's, almost an elevator speech of saying, here's what HPAI is, here's what Kansas is doing, we're I guess almost as safe as we can. This obviously, it's hard to find a succinct and direct answer, correct?
Very true. And, in the diversity, what we just showed you here, it makes that conversation harder when you start talking about the fact that it's in our, in our human population, possibly it's in our cats, it's in our pets, that convolutes that conversation. I think from a general one is that we have to still keep in mind that there's no reason to think that this is a food safety issue. This is not a food safety virus. This is not a human health component out there. And I qualify that with as long as we do the processes that we need to do, pasteurize that milk and cook that meat appropriately, it's not a food safety component. So I think that's the key thing we got to keep out there. We also have to realize what the impact is on that individual producer. And these guys that get it, whether it's their backyard flock and their pet duck, or whether it's the 1.2 6 million layers out there, it is truly impactful to some of these people. And that's been the hard thing to try to respond. I mean, they know when you knock on their door what we're there for, and that's to take care of their birds, and that's not a good thing to do, remember. But I think from a perspective is to know from Kansas is that we've got our ears to the ground all the time, and we're working with our accredited veterinarians, we're working with our flock owners, we're working with our extension offices to be diligent, keep an eye out. We want to make sure that they report it to us in a timely manner and don't be scared of the reaction. Unfortunately, the reaction is not good in the poultry world, but the adverse effect of it is far worse. And those birds are going to die whether we do it for them or not, because that's what the virus does to them. So I'm not giving you a real good succinct answer to that, but I think recognizing there's a lot to this and a lot of complexity to this, but we're working really hard to make sure that our producers and our flock producers are aware, and that biosecurity right now has been our best tool. And I go back to the fact that in 2014-15, we've seen farms spread it to farm, and that's not been the case in this outbreak. It's been a point source incursion from wild birds sitting outside the barn or flying over the cages or whatever the case may be.
Representative second week. Schlangenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So does that mean I can still eat my steak rare or medium rare, or do I have to incinerate it before I eat it?
I eat mine medium rare. Yeah, to that point, I don't think there's any concern. And again, I wasn't going to say, we haven't seen this in the beef industry, for lack of a better way of saying it. It's been a dairy component from the livestock world, unfortunately. But again, a cow's a cow, so I don't know that it's not there, but we haven't seen the impact in the beef industry.
Representative Droege.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Smith. My recollection is, like back in 2002, we had Vietnam started with some bird flu, and then it became, spread through the migratory birds, and that was an H5N1, and there were a few people died in Vietnam. And then we've had a recurring cycle of this communication of this disease because of the migratory birds. So that's not so terribly alarming, and even the fact that it mutates constantly, it looks to me like we've got a better surveillance and a better testing system, and and the direct communication of bird to bird instead of through premise correct connections. So in my feeling, I'm not, and I seem to gather this from you too, it's like, don't be terribly alarmed. This kind of goes on. We're really looking at this and trying to keep control over it, but we get so much news media involved that tries to paint a terrible picture that we need to kind of calm down a little bit and realize that this has probably been going on for a while, and there is some new things to this.
Yeah, you hit it on the button. I mean, this virus has been around for a long time. I mean, influenza virus, influenza A has been there for eons out there. And you're exactly right. Asia did have it in H5N1. It was a different strain that we're dealing, and so it did impact humans far greater over there than it has here. But that is why we're doing what we're doing, is that we don't want to make sure that it never gets to that point and we're not prepared and ready for that, or it sneaks up on us. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's definitely impactful to the industry, and the industry is really losing a lot of sleep over this deal. But it's nothing that we need to lose our head about and get to this point. We just, we've generated a lot of tools, and our old adage is you never want to make, let a good disaster go away or a disease outbreak go without learning something from it and being better. And I do believe we're far better positioned today than we were even 2.5 years ago when this thing started.
Other questions? Representative Page.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I don't know a lot about farming. I'm here to learn. Is there anything we can do about the wild birds? Well,
No.
I mean, besides killing them.
Yeah. My understanding is not. I mean, that's normal little processes. The other thing is we got to recognize they're federally protected, and so unless they're in a hunting season, and so there have been some proposals out there about how to try to eliminate them from exposure to farms. Hunting them and shooting them is not that answer, is what we have. Now, I will say there's a lot of research on talking about different, I I don't know what the term is, but evasion components, utilizing lasers, utilizing drones, utilizing that in an effort to try to at least scare them to a different path to where they're not impacting our, but with that being said, scare them off your place, they're going to go to another place out there. But no, I'm not sure there is a lot that we can do from them, that component of it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Last call. Any questions, comments, concerns? Dr. Smith, thank you. Thank you for being here. I know this is something that we talked about a lot. I'm glad to get the update on, so we kind of have, you know, as we look at other things moving forward and the impact it could and is having on the state. I live 4 miles north of the Kerwin Reservoir, and they've had the shoreline have been lined with birds.
Yep.
And there's been a few piles of feathers in our yard as well, and so we're not sure exactly what's going on, but
Yeah. Yeah,
be
no,
really
thank you very much for the opportunity. And yeah, if there's any other questions or you think of something, feel free to reach out to us anytime with that.
Representative
sir.
Neely, before you go.
How about affecting the
Mike,
predators?
Mike.
Affecting the predators?
It is, yeah. So nationally, the predators out there have been impacted more than Kansas has. Doing the wild animal surveillance component to it, right now in 24, the only 2 animals that we've seen was a positive, was a bobcat and a skunk. And we know that probably they were from a predator component of that. There's also indications that probably and I'll call them a predator, but the cats that have been infected, the domestic cats, it's probably been through predation of a dead bird because it's been the same strain that's been in that. We've also seen it in the strain in the dairy and the fact that they drank raw milk or potentially that. But yes, it does affect the predators. 2022, we've seen the bald eagles and the American condor heavily impacted from the fact of the predation. I haven't heard so much of that yet this year, but there's no reason to think that once things freeze up that we won't see that. But yes, they are susceptible to it. The foxes, the bobcats, the big cats are all susceptible.
Interesting. Okay.
With that said, I may ask, we classify them as what we call dead-end hosts, meaning that there's no indication that they're spreading it amongst themselves. It's strictly the predation on that positive bird and then getting impacted with it. They're not passing it on. There's no indication that the mammals are passing this on to other mammals in any sort of way other than through the milk and the dairy world.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Appreciate it. That's all right. It's all right. You did a great job, and so we appreciate it. Okay, so now we know. The quiz will be tomorrow before we have water. 16 questions with an essay for extra credit. No. Is that right? Is that about right, Representative Page? Is that fair? So.
Just don't shoot us.
All right. Okay. Also, committee, we did distribute the committee and conferee rules. You should have them in front of you. So review them. I want to approve them tomorrow. Or unless you have any questions, come see us beforehand, but we will plan on doing that tomorrow and then be on our way with that. We will talk in water with the chair of the Kansas Water Authority, and I believe Director Owens of the Julie will be here. Lorenz, yes, who spent a lot of time traveling the state working on a water plan. So I believe that they will be our presenters tomorrow. And I know they've been in water already, but I thought it'd be good if we have, it kind of, again, helps to have another big group that kind of looks at all that and ask questions about water. It's more than just irrigators, it's the whole thing. So that'll be coming up. And then that is, tomorrow's Wednesday. Thursday, what do we have Thursday? I'm sorry. That's Thursday's water. Tomorrow is going to be a very short meeting. We are going to basically bill reductions. It'll be a very short meeting. So if you have other plans, make other plans. So hopefully I'll try to start somewhat on time. So maybe by 3:45 you can go on your next thing. So unless Representative Rozier wants to make another loaf of, no, I guess you have to start that now. It was very good. So, Dave, thank you all for not showing up for the lunch. So, so anyway, I'm sorry, water's Thursday, no meeting on Friday. And then next week, we will have Ag Secretary Mike Beam, kind of a state of the Kansas agriculture report on Monday. And then Tuesday, we will have our commodities groups here to talk about all those, the checkoff groups. I know, Dana, I just found that out. So, no big deal. Representative Syward.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for recognizing me, but I don't know if you see who snuck in the door.
I did.
Okay, I didn't know if you was going to recognize.
I thought I would.
Okay.
And when I felt the ground shake, and I thought maybe the trumpet had happened, but in the back, Representative Jack Timish, former representative, we call him representative. Thank you for being here. County commissioner now. He's bigwig, and but he served this committee actually, and a lot of other things. So he's from down at the not Cunningham, but Kingman. That's right. That's right. Well, that's what I kind of thought. So we did introduce everybody, but I'm also going to give a shout out to my former commissioner in Phillips County, Max Dibble, who was the chair of the Kansas Association of Counties. He's wrapping up his career in that line this week, and tomorrow's County City Day too. So hopefully have time to meet with those people that are here today. Anything else? Dana, did I miss? Okay, so we'll do the committee rules tomorrow. What they are, they're pretty much, or they are about the same for every committee. And so try to keep everything the same so there's no changes or surprises. So if I see nothing else, we are adjourned, and we will see you tomorrow.